So to give a better idea of what's going on underneath, that's actually the forwardmost exhaust port that you see here. And then that's 5, 6, 7, and 8 hiding behind the strap. And this gives you a little bit better idea of where the challenges are with this, especially right up in here, this is a pretty bad turn. May end up actually bringing the tube up and over. Not quite sure about that one yet. The rear tube on this swap header over here looks like it's going to be just fine, and it may serve to locate the collector and everything else. As I shared earlier, I'd already cut this number 5 tube off. This tube just comes out and back a little too far for the steering box. I may also be able to say this is the one that's going to be too tight. I take that back to the steering box here in this section there. As to the rest of all of this, right now I have the engine in the furthest most back position it will go. And some of the things to be aware of are in here, for example, we've got the back, trying to get the camera to show the right spot here, sorry. That's the back of the alternator, and there's a plug that goes in there, and you can see we've got a bit of the original support member that goes down for the motor mount, as well as it houses the lower control arm. So I'm going to have to carve a hole in that. There's space to carve a hole if I have it back this far. I've also looked at this about an inch forward. Obviously it's always better to have the engine as far back as you can. The number 5 port here has plenty of room to turn. Number 6, we can certainly get down past this motor mount. Probably going to trim that a bit anyway, but it's really 7 that's the bugger. 8 here, no issues whatsoever. By the way, here you can see the bottom part of the clutch mechanism. So the 71s had an interesting pull clutch instead of a push, so the pivot pulled up. I rebuilt this some years ago. We put the T56 in, put the master cylinder for it down in here behind this Saginaw box. You can see the little S right there. And then a bunch of rod ends and a little pivot point. Worked really well back in the day with the T56. So coming back a little further, this is the cantilevered arm that supports the back of the trans. Now normally you would go from right across here to right over there for the typical mount for C6, top load, or whatever would have been in these cars. But the T56 is substantially longer, and I'll try to get a little more of a shot here. So this gives you a sense of what the cantilever part of the mount does back to here. Now the other way I've supported this is more of this aero tubing stuff going up to underneath. Sorry for the change in angles. So I've got the this semicircular piece here acts as the drive shaft safety loop. It's a little flattened on the bottom to clear these exhaust pipes, which really tuck up close to it. All this box work you see here, this is the additional torque boxes or strength boxes they add to convertibles. So these boxes are part of the structure, and everything has to cram through this little tunnel. So this has always been a bit of a complication, but managed to fit. That's a 3.5-inch exhaust on each side. I have a 3.5-inch Dr. Gas X pipe that slides into here, and then will connect to the headers right about here and here, and then it'll bend back around. This is, of course, the stuff for the e-brake. But anyway, this gives you a sense of how all this sits in here. You can see how this is this length from the mounts to this is the same as the T56. The T56 Magnum has dual mounts here, 2 sets of bolt holes, the outer and the inner. I happen to have the inner from the old one, so I'm using that. Over here on this side, as you can see, this is just if I get these various connectors for the starter and stuff out of the way, I've got a block-off plate on the exhaust on this side. You can see there's pretty much all the room in the world. Here you can see how the this is a energy suspension mount. The mount actually technically sits at a different angle than the plate does, but when it squishes down and it kind of takes that out, I'm going to be adding a U-plate here to bolt this to, and the similar on the other side along with this locating pin once I finalize the engine position. And the engine position is going to be dictated by that clearance. The other very tight area of clearance is this is the S197's AC compressor, and I've got this here so it just clears this area that supports the front control arm, and just in front of my intermediate mount that we've started fabrication on. And so it'll clear. Have to use this S197 or maybe even a SN95 because the connection, the only electrical connection is here underneath, and then the actual connections itself, you kind of see down there, you know, for the AC come off the top. 2018 style has connectors and stuff on the bottom. It just interfere with all this. It would never work. This is of course an 8-rib pulley as part of the supercharger drive system. So you can see we've got decent clearance there. Things are tight, but certainly doable all the way around on this side. Room for the alternator. If I ever have to change this stuff, gonna have to jack the front of the motor up. Just that's gonna be reality. And then you can see the biggest and most interesting piece is oil pan. So as we've described before, I used some plastic to seal off the bottom of the motor, attached the plastic tray here onto the bottom to attach it, and so that's allowing me to look at clearances here from the blast can. So you can see at this mounting height, this is super tight to the bottom of the windage tray. This means that I'm going to end up putting the oil pan just above this. So in this little section here, which is about 2.5 inches wide or so, I'll have a deep sump in the back here. So a deep sump there and a deep sump here. I'm going to connect the two at the bottom across here, and then our pickup will just come straight out of where the pump comes in, which is right down here. And so the pickup will live about here relative to all these components. So it'll be a double sump pan. I'm gonna have to make this because nobody makes one that really fits this anyway. But this gives you a sense of how tight this all needs to sit so I can get the engine low in the car, because we are looking for a low center of gravity. The other thing you have to do when you're working on these and pay very careful attention to is where are all your steering components going? So I'm going to move this. This is at full, well now it is. This is a full left turn. And you can see how the arm moves across. One of the things the arm does because of the arc that it moves in here and on the idler arm is that the arm moves away, or in this case closer to, let's see if I can do this, a little tough. Let's put this down for a second. You can see there when the arm goes through its arc, it goes closer to the cross member and then back out again as we go to a full right turn. So the amount of this distance changes. So the distance on the sump here has to take that into account, as well as taking into account the bolts where they go to the tie rod ends on each end. So all these things have to be considered when you're making how far across and how deep this pan can be. A lot of you who know anything about a 71, 73 are looking at this cross member here and saying, what the hell is that? As you know, those of you who are familiar with this cars, unlike the earlier Mustangs that had a bolt-in cross member, This is normally a welded box section that goes across right here. It'd be even tighter than this is. I made it removable quite a few years ago when I first started working on this car back in the early 2000s. And then later on, when I needed to get the motor back, because we were putting the aftermarket big block in it and all that, I removed it again and made this tubular section which bolts from each side with these big giant fine thread Allen bolts. So it holds pretty tight. It's never moved around on me. I'm pretty happy about that. See where I added a little bit of ugly material and some even funkier welds. This is what happens when you weld on your back under a car. In any event, so this is where you see some of the modifications I've made over the years. This is removable. Because you're wondering, how is this pan ever going to get in here? I'll put the pan on under the car rather than put it in with the motor. This pan goes on nice and clean, has this factory style O-ring thing, seals up real nice. So we'll just drop the motor like I have been in here without the pan. This drops out by disconnecting the tie rod across the steering arm rather, and then dropping the idler arm here. And then this unbolts, so I'll be able to just put the pan in place and do it that way. As mentioned before, this header just drops right in. It's a piece of cake. It's the one on this side that may end up being pieced yet. I'll do another segment when we finalize what the header looks like. But those are the big things in terms of getting this Gen 1 Coyote into the 71, 73 Mustang style chassis. So you can see down here on the bottom, this is a good time to illustrate this. Header clearance is helped by this massaging that I did in here back years ago, but you don't need to do that to get a Coyote in the car by any means. So this gives you an idea where everything is. Talk to you again soon.